My name is Megha Kansra. I am the Director of Resilient Schools Strategy. I am joined here by my teammate, Teresa Spiewak, a District Support Specialist, and my other teammate, Joe Sidlecki, Associate Commissioner at the TEA. And we also have a guest speaker and panelist today, Carrie Fulgham, who is the Virtual School Administrator from Lubbock ISD. So in the later half of this conversation, we're going to be doing some Q&A from Carrie, because we heard loud and clear from all of you that it is very helpful to hear from districts who are doing this work on the ground. And Carrie has been a very thoughtful and intentional leader in virtual academy work. So excited to have Carrie here. A few logistical notes as we get started. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to enter your questions and reactions in the chat box as we go. We like to keep a pretty lively chat box going. And again, if you haven't already, go ahead and select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down option so that when you're chatting things out and you actually want it to go to the whole group, we can all see your answers. Additionally, I'll be pausing at a few different points to just gauge your reactions and take your questions. And finally, we will share the slides afterward, and we will also post the recording within about a week or so. We want to note that in this conversation in particular, we're going to have a few pretty content-rich slides. So you might find yourself thinking, gosh, I want to screenshot that. I hope I get this slide later. So rest assured, we will be sharing these slides. Our objectives today. So we are hoping you all leave after this session today able to describe Virtual Academy advantages and some key considerations. Additionally, that you're able to name action steps in establishing a Virtual Academy at your district this spring semester. And thanks to Carrie being in the room and a few other examples we'll be sharing, we hope you also are able to walk away with more of a sense of a real district example of a virtual academy in action. Our agenda for today, we're going to ground a little bit in why virtual academy. Then we will talk about how to establish a virtual academy and dig into implementation steps. Then we'll move into a Q&A with Carrie, our Lubbock ISD Virtual Academy Administrator, and then we'll close out. So let's get started with a little bit of the why. So in our last introductory session, we talked about what we're hearing from LEAs all across Texas, which is this problem of managing remote and on-campus instruction simultaneously is challenging, and it's also often pretty exhausting for teachers. At the same time, the path to alternative staffing and scheduling models can seem complicated or unclear. But at the end of the day, you all as district leaders are in a place where you need a strong solution that supports all of your students and families now. So that's kind of the feeling and the challenge that's brought us here. And in our last session, we also talked about 4 models that are approaches to managing remote and on-campus learning. So for those of you who were unable to join us last week, we talked about, on the left-hand side, the concurrent model, which is one that I think a lot of you are enacting now, which is where teachers deliver remote and on-campus instruction in the same class period simultaneously. There is the split scheduling model, where teachers deliver remote and on-campus instruction, but in separate class periods. So your teachers are still prepping for both modalities, but they do have a little bit of reduced complexity because they are delivering either to remote students at one point in time or to on-campus students. Then there's a third model to consider, which is split staffing. In the split staffing model, teachers within one site are staffed to deliver either remote or on-campus instruction, but not both. We've heard it called choosing either brick or click for your teachers. And the advantage of this model is that it really helps your teachers specialize in one modality and get really strong at either remote or on-campus instruction. So it does reduce some of the complexity of delivering both modalities at the same time. And then finally, a fourth option to consider, and the one that we're focusing on today, is a virtual academy approach. So a virtual academy approach is really a district-wide approach where you support all of the remote learners in your district with a virtual academy, and other students attend school on campus. So a virtual academy, we'll get into some of the benefits here in a moment, but provides you a little bit more flexibility across the district, and it allows you to meet the needs of your families and students requesting remote learning with just a bit more of that ability and capacity cross-district. So again, today we're focusing on the virtual academy approach, and subsequent webinars will focus on split scheduling and split staffing. So before we jump in, I actually want to get a little bit of thinking from the virtual room here. Chat in what you feel are the benefits of the virtual academy approach. And again, go ahead and hit all panelists and attendees as you do that. Why are you here at this session? What is calling you toward the virtual academy model? Teachers can focus on a single modality. Appreciate that, Chad. Focus for the teacher. Love that call out, Leslie, that it takes the planning and delivery burden off of our in-person teachers. Yep, you are reducing the complexity for those in-person teachers. Brandon, having options for teachers and students, less stress, more consistency with on-campus student enrollments. Interesting, Megan. Support for teachers. So I'm seeing a clear theme here of really wanting to be attentive to teachers and making sure teacher load is reduced, teacher complexity is reduced. I also love this call out here. Thank you, Joe, for, it affords families a choice for what works for them. Sometimes it's hard to, be able to figure out your numbers and support to deliver virtual learning effectively across your district, but a virtual academy is one way to do that. And appreciate that call out there too, Shelley, of maximizing resource usage. Absolutely. Well, thank you for getting the juices flowing there. I'm going to just summarize some of the benefits, most of which you all already called out here. So for families and students, virtual academies really provide an avenue for stronger remote learning delivery because teachers are able to specialize in remote learning. And there's a little bit of a greater ability for the district to actually deliver on families' preferences for remote learning. So this was Joe's call out here that across your campuses, you're better able to figure out your numbers and your support in terms of virtual learning for every family that has requested it. On the teacher end, as we discussed already, virtual academies reduce complexity and increase sustainability for teachers across the district if done appropriately. So this could be a real win for your teachers who really might be encountering a lot of complexity, a lot of additional planning hours at this moment in time. From a school leader's standpoint, there's also the benefit, and I think Carrie can speak to this in a little bit, that with the central support of leadership of a virtual academy, districts can actually free up on-campus school leaders to focus on safety protocols, to focus more closely on on-campus learning. So actually, you don't have that divided attention of school leaders, where school leaders have to figure out how to also support teachers in both modalities. And then finally, on a district end, as discussed, pooling remote learners and teachers across the district actually positions you a little bit better to manage within your staffing and resource constraints and deliver the options that families want. So there are benefits kind of across all of these groups of the virtual academy approach. So with some of these benefits in mind, let's dive into some implementation guidance on establishing a virtual academy. So after you've come to a decision as a district to launch a virtual academy at your LEA, and again, we highly recommend coming to that decision with strong family and teacher voice, there are essentially 4 main implementation steps that you'll want to take to implement a virtual academy. First, you'll want to build the foundation by making some key decisions around how to structure your virtual academy. Then you'll want to pivot your school communities to deliver on the virtual academy structure that you decided on. So this entails communicating with your families and students and recruiting and assigning your virtual academy teachers. And then there's a third step of onboarding your school communities with some clear roles and expectations. And finally, a fourth step of ongoing support once your virtual academy is launched, to make sure that your virtual academy is well implemented and you're continuously improving over time. Now, under each of these 4 steps, there are a few key actions to take. So for example, to build the foundation for your virtual academy, you'll want to make some initial decisions about master scheduling and staffing and virtual teacher roles. In the second step of pivoting your school communities, you'll want to take district action to proactively communicate with your families and students about the upcoming transition, while also working on recruiting and assigning your staff. So we'll dive deeper into each of these steps. And let's start by double clicking on step 1, building the foundation. So in this first step, you'll wanna start off by making a few initial decisions. So very specifically, which campuses, grades, and courses will your virtual academy cover? And second, what student to teacher ratio is feasible on campus versus in remote instruction at different grade levels? So the answers to these 2 questions will really help you estimate how many of your virtual academy staff will be needed in terms of just assigning and recruiting staff appropriately to meet your needs across grades and courses. Now, you might have already made these decisions, and these decisions can probably be made in, potentially even one quick meeting across your leadership team. We do recommend, as you think about this decision, to consider a few key inputs. So we recommend thinking about the number of families that are requesting remote so that you have an accurate estimate. Think about the number of certified staff across courses and your asynchronous and synchronous time allotments. And a few of these other factors below as well. So just some good considerations so that you feel pretty clear on some of these basic structural decisions as you get started. And the next stage in the process is really thinking through your master scheduling and your staffing plan. So a recommended process here, as we've talked to districts, is start off by really thinking about, your on-campus students and your remote students. And first, really try to come up with a clear estimate of the number of on-campus teachers required. So, filter based on your on-campus students, the on-campus target student-teacher ratio that you're going for, given the safety protocols that you need in place. And that allows you to estimate the number of on-campus teachers that are required. And then you're able to kind of back into, based on your available teaching staff, the number of teachers that are available to be assigned to a virtual academy. And then filter that through along with your remote students, and you can estimate the ratio that you're looking at of teachers to students. This is a good moment to pause because if the ratio you're looking at for virtual teachers to virtual students, if that ratio is essentially too high in terms of number of students supported by each teacher, consider a few different options to make sure that this is sustainable for your virtual teachers. So you might consider strategically adding some aides or paraprofessional support. You might consider strategically grouping some classrooms so that you've got team teaching or co-teaching happening and teachers are able to balance the load effectively. Or you might even consider some A/B rotating synchronous models. So just a little bit of food for thought as you're thinking about, okay, what's the process that we should take to back into really understanding our staffing plan and making sure that we've allocated teachers effectively here. Now, a next step in kind of building the foundation is figuring out how you're going to support your virtual academy teachers. So there are a few different options to doing this. So you could go the route of Lubbock ISD, and again, we'll hear Carrie talk about this in a moment, but you could provide a central virtual academy principal or administrator. And that individual would be primarily responsible for really providing the supports and structuring, kind of the process for virtual academy teachers. Or you could potentially reallocate some central staff or coaches to be dedicated to supporting virtual academy teachers, maybe reallocate some of their time or consider a portion of your academics team really focusing on virtual academy teachers. I think a key question here is just really making sure it's clear for your virtual academy teachers who their primary coach and assessor is, because I think this is information that your teachers are just going to want to be really clear on during the transition. And a few just key inputs here as you consider the answers to these questions. You might want to consider, where your teachers are in terms of their remote instruction strengths and support needs as you're structuring that support. You'll also want to consider the capacity of your campus instructional leaders. Are your campus instructional leaders in a place where they can flex in and support virtual academy teachers as coaches, or is it actually better to provide some of that central support? Generally, what we've heard back is providing some of that central support is incredibly helpful and relieves some of the burden off of on-campus leaders. But this is, a key decision you'll want to make and communicate to your teachers. A final step in the process of just building this foundation is setting up some key enablers. So the virtual academy approach offers a really important advantage and a lot of important advantages in relieving teacher load and enabling you to deliver strong virtual instruction. There is, one key consideration to manage in a virtual academy context, which is that when students switch modality between on-campus and remote instruction or vice versa, having a virtual academy approach can mean that they end up switching teachers as well. So to make that transition between teachers as smooth as possible, you'll want to put in a couple of key enablers, and we've listed a few here. You do not have to have all of them in place. So I don't want folks to, fret that, oh gosh, we don't have a common curriculum. Maybe that means we can't do this. That's absolutely not the case. But we are noting that, having a common scope and sequence, having common teacher collaboration time, and of course, engaging your family and your staff effectively before, during, and after those student transitions between modality. These are all kind of key enablers that really position you to manage those transitions fairly well. So just have kind of some of these key enablers in mind, and that, we have heard from districts that transition can be effectively managed, particularly if you've proactively communicated with families that there's an expectation that, the teacher could change in this switch, but that there is a key benefit coming out here of stronger virtual instruction and teachers who are better positioned to deliver that stronger virtual instruction. All right, I'm going to pause here. I think I saw just a couple of items come through in the Q&A and just check in with my teammate Teresa in case there is a note here. I think I'm seeing a question here from Leah. Is there a plan to carry this model into the 21-22 school year? Definitely appreciate that question. More to come on that. We will definitely be, sharing more whenever that guidance is clear. We do appreciate the question, and I think would be helpful to keep hearing feedback from you all if you are interested in exploring this model in the next school year. It just helps us figure out how to structure our support and guidance as well. All right, switching into this second step, which is sort of this step of pivoting and supporting your families and mobilizing your staff in the process. So on the family and student communication front, we really recommend focusing on the why, the when, and the how. So lay out a really clear rationale for the mid-year switch, particularly to support your students effectively, making it clear that you're looking to better deliver on what families want in terms of virtual instruction, and that you're looking to support your teachers in the process. Be very clear about the when. So, at what date and time will the transition happen? When will students know about their schedule and their virtual academy teachers? So, the sooner you can start communicating some of these things, the more you'll kind of reduce any uncertainty that might be there, and the better you'll manage the change. And then finally, the how. So be sure to share any tools that you've got or the process for the launch. I think really focusing on the why, the when, and the how, the communication can be fairly simple, but if you nail those three items, you're in a place where families and students are a little bit clearer about the transition. And then finally, thinking about recruiting your virtual academy staff. So, a couple of considerations here. we really recommend thinking about how many of your teachers are interested in being Virtual Academy staff. In an ideal universe, you really want to primarily sign up teachers who are feeling an area of strength or affinity in the Virtual Academy or in virtual teaching. However, we realize that the reality is sometimes the number of teachers interested doesn't always match the number of seats that you need filled in terms of teachers. So if the number of teachers who are interested is actually greater than the number of seats, that's a great position. We'd recommend you run a very quick application process that does include a little bit of reflection on the candidate's remote learning data to date. So how engaged are their students in remote learning? What's the achievement level of students in their classroom, in their remote classrooms? On the other hand, if the number of teachers who are interested is actually lower than the number of seats that you need filled in your virtual academy, we recommend that you go through a little bit of a school leader referral process. So school leaders, perhaps give a little bit of a friendly tap to teachers who have shown some evidence of delivering stronger remote learning or have the aptitude and capacity to grow in their remote learning delivery. So just a couple of routes to consider there. And then you're at your onboarding and launch phase. So, I think the key thing here, again, onboarding doesn't have to be particularly involved, but we do recommend a little bit of a staged process where you first onboard your virtual academy leadership and coaches, then onboard your virtual academy teachers, and then move to onboarding your families and students so that each step of the way you're kind of bringing folks along. So starting off with your leadership and coaches, key things to consider in the launch here are making clear the roles and dedicated time to support your virtual academy teachers to your virtual academy leaders. Making sure that they feel prepared to actually lead that virtual academy teacher onboarding and the family and student onboarding. That the connections are clear with campus leaders to manage those transitions when they happen for students between remote and on-campus learning. And finally, any central systems to set up your virtual academy are actually pretty clear, and folks know how to navigate those different systems, whether you're talking about a learning management system or alternative structures. In terms of teacher onboarding, we recommend hopping into these onboarding moments with teachers, being ready to share student assignments and relevant student data. Again, having an orientation to any new central systems that you're using for your virtual academy. Making clear if you are making any shifts on scope and sequence or curriculum. If you have a central set of virtual instruction look-fors and expectations, this is also a great time to kind of come out of the gates with that. And additionally, making clear coaching and support structures that are there to support teachers. I think the key message here is providing as much clarity as possible upfront, but also providing clarity on how support will be provided to your teachers over time. And then finally, we recommend that your teachers are able to leave ready for Virtual Academy day one with some clear action items. And then finally, on the family and student onboarding piece, we recommend being pretty clear about teacher assignments, schedules, and rationale for the switch. So again, just reiterating the why, the when, the how at this stage as well is pretty critical to make sure you're sort of repeating the message and really bringing families along. Again, making the central systems clear and providing some clear expectations for how the transitions will be managed between remote and on-campus instruction. Particularly, families should be clear on how they request a transition, when they request a transition, the fact that teacher switches will happen, and making it clear and ensuring that families leave with a sense of comfort around how teachers will transition student relationships with a lot of care. And just to bring this to life a little bit, we've got a couple of examples. So Forney ISD really took an intentional approach with their virtual academy hub with some parent-facing resources. So you see a little snapshot here, for example, of a student virtual commitment reminder that just lays out some clear student expectations for parents and guardians. And I think we can also just drop the link into the chat of just where you can find this this Forney resource as well, and this student expectation language. So this really helps just provide a bit of clarity to parents and a central resource. Another example from Forney ISD, they have kept up a practice of providing Parent Academy tech resources, including a technology tip of the week. So see a little snapshot here, and I think my teammate Teresa's probably dropped in a couple of links so that if you're curious, you can kind of pop in there and check it out. But these are all good ways of just providing parents some concrete guidance that just helps them every step of the way. And finally, just a little snapshot. This is kind of a fun one from Midland Online Academy that depicts, what does it look like to spend a day in the life of a student in Midland Online Academy. So they've laid out, for this particular student, what the different activities are that they're engaging in throughout the day. Just a nice way to kind of demystify what it means for your student to be enrolled in the virtual academy. Now the final step, and then we'll pause and transition, but the final step here is ongoing support. So a note here that, if you're really in the depths at this moment, in figuring out how to stand up your virtual academy for the spring, we really recommend that you just focus on those first 3 steps that we discussed. And you can think about this ongoing support piece even just after you've launched. We realize that you'll have to prioritize if you're really looking to make a switch in the spring semester. Once you are at a point where you're thinking about ongoing support, we recommend thinking about 3 main buckets, the ones listed here on the left-hand side. So thinking about how you're supporting your virtual academy teachers, how you're doing progress monitoring, and then finally, how you're supporting transitions to and from on-campus learning. And there are a lot of different ways to provide this ongoing support. We've listed a few examples here that aren't exhaustive. So for example, providing virtual walkthroughs and coaching, organizing data reflection meetings with your virtual academy leadership, continuing to survey your family, your students, your virtual academy teachers. And additionally, making really clear, if you do need to switch into 100% remote learning, which a few of our districts, have needed to manage that shift, what does the transition plan look like for your virtual academy? So just a few different nuggets to consider as you're thinking about that ongoing support piece. All right, I will pause here and just see if we've had any additional questions come in through the chat as we've moved forward. All right. Yes, I appreciate that note here, Joe, that I just want to call out that an option for smaller and rural districts is actually kind of developing a co-op virtual academy. So this idea of, kind of getting creative, if you're worried about your resources being stretched on at your own district, to pool resources across districts, to work together to serve families. So love that concept. Great. All right, we are going to switch into our Q&A portion today. So many of you expressed, interest in learning from real district examples. So we're excited to do a bit more of that today. If you were at our introductory session last week, you might recall our overview of Lubbock ISD's virtual academy approach. I'm not going to go into deep detail here because Carrie can speak to it. But we do think, one really key element of the approach that we admire is that Lubbock designated a virtual academy administrator, Carrie Fulgham. And that approach has really helped free up on-campus principals to focus on on-campus learning, and it has provided the right support to virtual academy teachers. So excited to have Carrie here today. A little bit of background on Carrie. Carrie is a certified math, social studies, and ESL teacher, and also an EC to 12 certified principal. Carrie was previously a digital learning coordinator with Lubbock, and is a Google certified trainer and an Apple teacher. So Carrie brings a lot of strengths in remote learning and online learning. Carrie has been with Lubbock for over a decade, and actually stepped into her role as virtual school administrator this school year. So Really excited to have you here, Carrie. How's it going?
Thank you. It's great. Um, Ready to start looking at moving into the second semester. So, lots happening right now.
Great to hear. Yeah, we imagine there's quite a bit of activity right now, so we are extra appreciative that you joined us today. And so in this Q&A, I've got just a few questions to kick things off with Carrie, and then we're going to open it up to the chat thread here for more Q&A with Carrie. So a first question just to kick us off, because folks might not be familiar with the role of a virtual school principal or administrator. So would love to hear, Carrie, what are your responsibilities in your role and how do you support virtual teachers?
Sure. So I'm still also in the digital learning coordinator position. So I'm serving both positions right now, which has really helped in this role because I do have a background in understanding the technology side of it. So as the virtual school administrator, of course, it started with staffing and looking at numbers and figuring out how we were going to get everything set up. And then really a lot of coaching has been involved as far as helping teachers understand um, in their instructional roles and how to make it most beneficial for students. Um, I'm also helping the principals from our campuses in evaluating teachers and looking at what that looks like for a virtual T-test evaluation versus a face-to-face T-test evaluation. Um, and then we are continually changing up our staffing and our scheduling because, as you can imagine, students are continually moving from virtual to face to face and from face to face to virtual with each grading period. So, um, I'm doing those pieces as well as working with parents and students to make sure that we're providing what they need during this time. Um, as far as supporting my virtual teachers, we meet. I try to meet with each one of them weekly, but there's 84 of them right now. We started just for elementary, there's 84 virtual teachers. We started with 96, and after the first grading period, we were able to reduce that number a little bit and provide some more support on our campuses. Um, but meeting with them to look at student concerns, kids that we need to make a more effort with, and either because we haven't seen them or the work that we're receiving from them isn't what we were looking for. Um, so we talk about student concerns. We look at data and how valid the data is. And so when we're looking at those pieces to see where did you get your data? How did you assess the students? Um, were you able to monitor them during those pieces? And then we also look at our curriculum and our pacing and how we're progressing and how we're filling gaps in student achievement. So um, those are some of the aspects. And right now, as I'm sure most people can attest to, is a whole lot of emotional and support for teachers and students alike. And so just making sure everybody is getting through and getting to the Thanksgiving break that we all need. And then how we're going to make the most out of the weeks we have before Christmas break and prepare for the second semester. So that's kind of where we're at right now. One thing that I can say is it's continually changing. We're always making little modifications to improve what we're doing. So we're always building and changing and twerking a little bit to make things more beneficial for students and staff as well.
Carrie, that's a really helpful description, and it just sounds like your job encompasses, quite a bit of support to teachers, right? And really even campuses when you think about, the scheduling supports, and just the forward thinking and planning that's required. I did notice just a couple questions come through on the chat. So Lubbock ISD does have about 27,000 students. And Carrie, looking to you for just a little bit of confirmation on, is this elementary school only for Virtual Academy?
So our elementary school looks a little different than our middle school and high school. Our elementary school is exactly what you've described as a virtual academy. We have teachers that are designated to teaching that. In the middle school and high school, we kind of have a mix of a few of the different pieces. We have, of course, some areas where we've got teachers teaching synchronous, so they're providing both face-to-face and virtual instruction. We have some areas where kids are doing more self-paced and using Edgenuity as a program to provide some of that coursework. And then we have some where teachers have designated a class period where they're doing virtual instruction. And then they have other class periods where they're doing face-to-face. So at the middle school and high school level, one of the things that we really strive for is that we're providing equity for our students. So if they've chosen virtual, they're still able to get the same graduation plan, or they're still able to receive the same courses that they would if they were face to face. And so that's provided a few more obstacles that we haven't, we're not able to do a complete virtual academy there at the time being. So it's kind of a mix. And I think they also ask about the total number of students for virtual. We have, like you had said, 27,000 students, about 27,000 students enrolled. Um, and we have currently, we're sitting at a little over 5,000 students in virtual. We've gone up to, I think our largest number at one point was 7,700 students virtually.
That's pretty substantial. Really helpful. And I'm also curious, you know, we talked about this piece around the transition of students from remote to on campus and vice versa. How have you all managed that process, and what supports did you put in place to make that process go smoothly?
So one of the things that we really appreciated that we received from the state was the ability to really put those grading period guidelines in, where students can't transition back and forth except for during at the grading period changes. We're on a 9-week grading period, and so like right now is our window where students can request to switch from face to face to virtual, or from virtual to face to face. We have this week and then the week after our Thanksgiving break as the 2-week window where they can choose that. And then that gives us 2 weeks to look at staffing and get everything set up scheduling wise. And that affects both me on the virtual side, but also every one of our campuses. Because if we are going to either need another teacher from a campus or have a teacher that goes back face to face, that affects the campus scheduling as well. And so that's kind of what we've used that grading period for. We do have students that, you know, Lubbock's pretty high right now as far as our COVID cases. And as a county, we're pretty high. And so we do have students that are choosing to not go face to face right now. And for that time period where they're in between the grading periods, our teachers are providing asynchronous instruction from the campus until we can get them moved over into virtual and make staffing changes. So that's kind of how we're using that.
That's really helpful to hear, Carrie, how you all leverage that grading period flexibility to make the switches happen. And I'm just seeing a question in the chat from Pamela that feels relevant here with this question. What happens with new enrollees? Are there a lot of them maybe at Lubbock? Is it a high mobility district? You know, how do you manage that?
Sure. Yes, I would consider us probably a little bit higher mobility district. And we have quite a few students that enroll. And when you first enroll, if you're not from within the district and moving from campus to campus, if you're a new enroll to the district, you have a choice of face to face or virtual. And so they're able to make that choice even if they're in the middle of a grading period. We had some of the surrounding areas here have gone without the virtual option. They've decided to not pursue the virtual option anymore at their district level. And so we have some of those students that have come over and they are able to join our virtual academy in between the grading periods. So we do allow that. We are allowing students to go back to the campus if they choose to go back to the campus and face-to-face option. As long as we're able to support that on the campus, we'll allow them to go back to the campus. So
Carrie, I really appreciate that. I think that the description of how you manage the process, but also I think the fact that, you know, even in a moment right now where I think some districts are worrying about enrollment, right, that actually being able to offer a virtual academy has meant that you're able to offer options to families who maybe weren't able to get that virtual academy option from another district. So it really interesting to, I think, hear that perspective as well. I actually really like Douglas's question in here. What does a virtual academy day look like for a student? What's their schedule like? And perhaps there are a few different answers to that. So yeah.
sure. We we have our pre-K, kinder, and first. We've left them as self-contained. So my virtual teachers for pre-K, kinder, and first kind of got to create their own class schedule. Most of them have separated their classes into smaller groups, and they'll do like a morning calendar time that's synchronous with a group of 10 kids and give them instructions on some asynchronous pieces that they can complete. And then they'll start another synchronous group with a different group of kids. And they just kind of rotate through that. And so they may do an ELAR piece in the morning and then a math piece, and then they'll have a lunch break and then continue with science and social studies. We also have our specials. So we have music and art and PE lessons available for the students to complete asynchronously. We don't guide those for the elementary kids, but they're able to complete those pieces asynchronously. When we get into second through fifth, we went departmentalized. And so I basically built teams. And so I would take a math teacher, a reading teacher, and either a science social studies teacher that could do both or one of each, and built schedules for the kids to rotate through classes like they would on a campus. When you're looking at fourth and fifth grade, it's usually 4 teams. So about 12 teachers, 12 to 16 teachers for each one of those grade levels. And the kids are rotating through those schedules. In middle school and high school, we're staying true to the campus schedules. And so wherever their home campus is, we're sticking to that same bell schedule. That way, if like for instance, if they have French 2 during second period, that's not something we have extra teachers for that have that specialty certification. So they would have to join that class synchronously. So we want them to stay true to those bell schedules so they'll be able to participate in those classes as needed.
Carrie, that feels like a smart solution to, I think, a question that I've heard a few times of how do you manage some of those specialty courses or you know, areas where you need a teacher with a particular certification, and that seems like a, you know, an interesting solution that you found there. I do have, you know, one more question for you before we go back through. I'm seeing so many good questions in the chat, and so would definitely want to ask you a few of those questions too. But we know there are a lot of districts who've joined us in this webinar today who are looking at setting up a virtual school for the spring semester. So I'm curious if you've got, you know, steps that you would recommend that they take in the next, you know, few weeks, and any words of advice that you'd offer.
Sure. I think a couple of things that you had talked about earlier are really key. Communication has been the thing that makes everything go so much smoother, is just open communication. We found that most of our parents are really willing to work with us and maneuver through all of the change and the things that we need, as long as we're communicating with them what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's beneficial for students. And so just getting the communication started, getting feedback from your families and from your staff. One thing that if I was to redo, I would have given a whole lot more upfront information about what virtual academy looks like before I asked the staff if they were interested in teaching that way. We didn't have a whole bunch of teachers that wanted to do virtual instruction. And so we did have to go to our campuses and say, hey, we need a fourth grade teacher from you because your fourth grade class sizes are to where we could combine them and we could um, use a teacher for that. And so then they would have to go have those conversations with teachers and make some decisions there. And so I think we would have had a whole lot more buy-in from our teachers if they had an idea of what it would look like. Because a lot of our virtual teachers are now loving this option. Um, and so I think that would help. But honestly, we had to build it to see what it was going to look like. So that would be something that I would do, is just really be honest with them about the schedule, what it looks like, what their day looks like. Um, and then I would also take that 2 weeks to also look at your numbers and make sure you're building in um, a little bit of flexibility, because change has been the only thing that's been consistent through this whole thing, is just making sure that you have a little bit of flexibility built in. And we have really built in some tutoring pieces and some help with attendance pieces that have been beneficial. And so having either aides or somebody that can use one class period to help with tutoring or attendance or RTI pieces has been really helpful as well.
That's really helpful, Carrie. And I'm thinking back to what you said about, well, and now that virtual academy teachers are living the virtual academy, they love it. And I wonder if you could just paint a little bit of that picture. You know, what do they like and appreciate about their roles and the approach right now?
Sure. Um, I think the one thing I hear the most is I've never been this connected to my kids. And I think that was one of the biggest fears, was that they weren't going to have those connections with kids and build relationships. And one of the things I continually hear is I've never known this much about my kids. I've never been this connected to their families, um, because they're having so much more interaction with not only just the student, but now the family is involved. Um, and so they're really enjoying knowing students on that level and being able to do that. We have many families and students that like you had mentioned, you gotta let them know that if they choose to switch from either way, that the staffing is going to be different. And we have many families that I don't want to go back face to face because we love our teachers here in the virtual academy, or they don't want to go virtual but they feel the need to, but they're still attached to those teachers. So I think that has been really neat to see the relationship building. And our teachers also feel like they've grown in a professional way. A lot of them are like, this isn't something that I would do for the rest of my life. However, I think my teaching when I go back to the classroom is going to be 10 times better because I've learned so many more tools that I can use in the classroom that I would have never ventured out to try to figure out if I had not been in this role. So I think that's something that has been really neat to see for our teachers.
That's really exciting. I love that. I'm seeing a good question here that Teresa has raised up from Chad. Are there guides or recommendations on class cap sizes for virtual classes? Curious to hear your thoughts there.
So um, we started off with pretty large class sizes because at the time we really wanted to make sure that our face-to-face class sizes were where they could space and they could do all of the safety protocols. Um, Our class sizes have gone down some. We did have to apply for waivers for our virtual classes in a lot of places. But for my elementary teachers, class sizes for virtual, anytime between 25 and 35 seems to be manageable for most, and they're able to kind of keep that class size there. Obviously, the less the better, and the more they can do with them. But that seems to be manageable. Once you get past that 35 mark, it's quite a bit to handle on the grading front and the attendance pieces and those kind of things. Um, Especially when you're departmentalized, because then you're looking at 4 rotations of that kind of that size. Um, and then your our high school and middle school class sizes, we did start too big with some of our edgenuity pieces, and being able to monitor those student progress and see that effectively and do the attendance piece. So that's where we brought in some extra help for attendance, and they go pull edgenuity reports and look at how long students spent in the coursework and those kind of things. For synchronous courses, that's going to depend on the course and how much the teacher can handle as far as how many students are in the class versus face to face, and the combination of those. So does that help?
That's really helpful. I think paints a picture of how you all thought about this. Also seeing another question here. And if teachers do offer direct instruction via Zoom, Google Meets, etc., how do you all handle instruction when the teacher is absent? Do the substitutes provide that direct instruction via Zoom?
Yes, so this has been really neat. um some of our which I'm sure everybody in the state is facing some of the things we are. You have teachers that are out sick. And so we have substitutes that have gotten additional training to what our substitutes usually receive, so that they do know how to run Google Classroom and Google Meets. And so they are able to open those. But sometimes our teachers are quarantined and they're perfectly fine, but they're at home. And so we've seen a lot of pieces where the substitute is there in the classroom with the kids, and they'll get a Google Meet going, but the teacher's teaching the class through the Google Meet. So that has been pretty neat, because the teachers are still able to provide some instruction from home if they're just quarantined, or for other reasons have to be out. But our substitutes are getting a little bit extra on the training side, um, just to be able to feel comfortable with that. But we've also had a lot of teachers step in and help substitutes in getting class started. And of course, your students can do it. And so a lot of times the students are able to show you exactly how to get everything going and running. So we utilize that as well.
Yeah, it's helpful to hear how you might be supplementing some sub capacity with teacher capacity, but also just that teachers have all kind of grown their level to deliver in this mode. And maybe one more quick question. Please share how you're supporting special programs like special education, dyslexia.
Yeah. So one of the things that you talked about earlier was designating some of your people for the virtual pieces, and our special services department has done that. They've designated some of our resource and inclusion teachers to support our virtual instruction. And so every time I restaff, I also meet with our special support and make sure that we can schedule our resource and inclusion teachers along with our dyslexic programs and our um, all of those pieces, to make sure students' schedules will allow for that and that we can support those. Our teachers that are providing those pieces are included as a teacher on the class. So if they have students in a virtual class that need some support, then they're included in that Google Classroom as a teacher. They're given all the links so that they can join the meetings. And then they're usually setting up their own time where they're having small group pullouts with those kids in order to provide them some extra support.
Really helpful, and appreciate that we are kind of rounding out this Q&A on a note of, how do we support our diverse learners? Carrie, thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A. I think really helps to just bring to life all of the intentional work that Lubbock has done on the virtual academy.
Thank you. It's been a learning process for all, but we have a really good team and a lot of people are putting in a whole lot of work to make sure that we continually provide what our students need. So it's been neat to see everybody pitch in and do what we can to support students.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carrie. And I did notice so many more questions come in through the chat than that we could answer in this moment. So we'll see if we can actually follow up with some of you with good answers there. I am, of course, we have decided to use up our time and really make sure we're hearing from Carrie. So I'm going to close out now in these last couple minutes here. So in terms of what's next, the fun doesn't end here. If you have interest in other staffing models, we are offering a couple of additional follow-up webinars, one on split staffing this Friday, and one on split scheduling on December 3rd. You can always access prior webinar material on our Strong Start page. We've provided the link here, but we'll also follow up with the slide decks in case you have trouble locating any of this. We'll also keep developing and posting any additional supports, particularly in terms of virtual academy. So we'll be collecting from districts that have done this work, sample schedules you can learn from, sample plans. A quick chat question to inform our work here. What additional support needs do you have as you consider or even just make that transition to a virtual academy approach? This will just really help us make sure we're being responsive to your needs. So take a moment and just chat any of your needs in. Small school perspective, really appreciate that, Monica. We'll see what we can do to find a small school that's doing this, and perhaps we can share some examples there. Well, do feel free to keep sharing some ideas there. And as folks share, I did also want to offer one more item here, which is that we have an ongoing series on virtual instructional strategies that we are currently running. And I believe my teammate Teresa just shared a link to some recordings and material there. So as you all continue to work to improve virtual instruction, we are running this series on student engagement, concurrent instruction, checks for understanding and differentiation. We've already done the student engagement session, so the material is available in the link that Teresa shared. And then we are hosting a concurrent instruction session this week, and we'll have these other couple of sessions happening in December. So, hoping to keep helping all of you as you improve virtual learning. And then finally, I know we're at the 3 o'clock mark, but we always appreciate your feedback and take it really seriously in informing our future supports. So do feel free to fill out the survey. And if you feel called, also just drop us a little note in the chat if you're taking away an aha or have any additional follow-up questions. We'll keep things open here for a moment just to let any final thoughts come through. Thank you all so much.